have their start point. They're at A. They know they want to get to the top of the mountain. That's B. They haven't figured out the path yet. Be their guide. I think it's really simple advice. It's just be honest with yourself. Because if I was honest with myself at that time, I would have been able to say, I am not capable of this right now. You can't just get into this industry. There's a process to it. Welcome back to the 1% podcast with Vin and
Shane. What's going on?
Oh,
guys?
yeah. We are on episode 5. Last episode, we dove into Shane's business. We wanted to understand what made the VA group a top 1% in the world, as to why I continuously try to refer people over to him. And anyone listening, if you need a VA, you should definitely go to him.
Agreed.
And today, Shane wanted to flip the script, and he wanted to talk about what potentially makes me a top 1% coach or therapist or whoever I'm supposed to be.
Well, you said the word potentially. I think you're easily the 1% coach from the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that I've talked to that are coaches. You know, I feel like a coach in general, especially nowadays, it's like a marketer in the early 2000s. It's like everybody's kind of jumped on board because they feel that they can coach somebody. So yeah. I'm curious, with everybody that thinks they're a coach or wants to be a coach, you know, what advice would you give them? How can they be that 1% coach?
You know, it's very funny because when I was about 23, 24, and I had just graduated with my master's in psychotherapy or social work, more appropriately. And I'd started doing psychotherapy. I had this vision of, I want to start my own thing, right? I want to maybe be a coach or whatever the case is. And I was really enamored by it. I started investing in some branding, and I wound up landing on this guy out there he was pretty big at the time, and he's exponentially grown further. And I said, I want to work with people, right? Like a B2C style. I want to work with individual people who want help. And he was trying to push me to, no, you don't want to do that. You want to work with coaches. You want to work with other coaches. You want to be a coach who coaches coaches. And I said, why do I want to do that? And he said, well, because that's where all the money is. He's like, you don't really get the money working with the individual. You get the money working with the coaches who have the money because they're trying to invest in their brand and they want to spend more and blah, blah, blah. But it didn't really feel aligned to me. Suffice to say, when I signed up initially, I thought, and this is, I'm telling this story because I want people to avoid making the same mistake. I thought that this was going to be life-changing for me, right? Because a lot of the times these coaches who coach coaches, they promise that you work with them, you do their program, you're going to make triple to quadruple to 5 times the investment you made. And as a 24-year-old who really didn't know any better and just wanted to get out there and make a difference in the world and wanted to start my business, I was like, all right, well, what's the investment? So it was 10K, or you could pay 8K in full to get, you know, that rapid fire, limited time, only on this call discount, right? So I was scared. I only had 8K to my name. Like, literally, that was all I had. I had $8,000 in my bank account. I was also somewhat transitioning jobs because I was working in one space and I didn't really want to do that anymore. And so I resigned from that job, and I was waiting for the other position. They told me I was going to start. That job wound up falling through. So I just gave this guy the last $8,000 I had in my bank account. My job fell through, and I had to live off my credit cards. And I was just going heavy into debt with the belief that this guy was going to teach me everything I needed to get that ROI, to make back triple, quadruple within the 30 days. That's what he was saying. A lot of coaches and a lot of experts out there make those promises, but here's the thing they don't tell you is it's really based on your capabilities. And as a 24-something-year-old who was down on his luck to some degree, going into debt, had no money, was living out of a scarcity and fearful mindset, I can tell you, I was not going to make it. I didn't know that at the time. I was banking that his expertise would somehow get me there. But it actually comes down to your capability to execute. And I didn't have that. And so one thing that if you want to become a great coach or you want to really develop your brand, because that's what it is you need to, one, be aware of what it is that you're helping people do. You need to dial in your messaging. You need to know who your ideal client is, what's their biggest problem, and how do you solve it. A lot of coaches also, as they're getting into this industry, they're trying to sell a result. And one of the biggest things that I've learned is that as a coach, you don't sell results. People already know what the result is they want, whether it's more money in their business or feeling free from their interpersonal issues. Like, people have the result they're already sold on. They want that result. They know that's what they're looking for. They also know most of the time, right? Sometimes you could kind of point them in another direction, but most of the time they know what their issue is. They're dealing with anxiety. They can't manage their schedule. They have bad habits. They have some sort of a problem that they haven't resolved. Maybe it's something, like what I used to struggle with was like food. Maybe it's something around food, right? They know what their problem is. They know what the result is. The biggest thing they can't solve for themselves is where you come in. When you're selling a service, you're selling a process. You don't need them to be convinced that they could have the result, because realistically, they're already convinced they could have the result. They just need to be convinced that your process is the one that gets them to the result. And so coaches make this mistake all the time. They're like, you're going to feel better if you work with me, and you'll feel happier and you'll feel lighter and you'll stop picking out on food and all of this stuff, right? The result you want, but they lack telling you how to do it. So really get clear on what your process is if you want to set yourself apart from the crowd. If you want to show that you are an expert in your field, you need to be able to create, or better yet, you need to be able to finish people's map. Imagine people are lost in the woods. They have their start point, they're at A. They know they want to get to the top of the mountain, that's B. They haven't figured out the path yet. Be their guide. Show them the way, create the markers, build out the trail, and give them the confidence that if they follow you, if they listen to your guidance, you will help them from A to B, because they trust that you are their Sherpa to some degree, that you can guide them through this uncertain woods and create the perfect path.
So you touched on some great points here, and I feel like there's thousands of gurus out there, right, who just sell that type of result. And I think it would be very beneficial, to hear, because I'm an impulsive guy to things that
Mm-hmm.
make sense from people that have already made a name for themselves, right? They've already completed their journey and I've been following them for a while. I'll hear their presentation. I'm like, that makes sense to me. So, how do people who were in your situation, previously, when you were, in 24 and you were lost and you were crossing your fingers hoping that this was going to work out, how do they do the research, or not make that same mistake and join these gurus and pay their life savings, and, essentially they're not in that right mindset? What advice would you give to them?
I think it's really simple advice. It's just be honest with yourself. Because if I was honest with myself at that time, I would have been able to say, I am not capable of this right now for a multitude of reasons. One, if all I have is $8,000 in my bank account, I should not be spending $8,000. Period. Like, bar none, you should not do that. Number two, if you don't know what your service is, if you don't know what your product is, if you don't know how to help people, if you don't know what the problem is that you solve, if you can't tell someone your message, you have no business trying to sell anything. You just don't. Like, you have to do the back work. You have to sit there and come up with these things. You can't just be like, tomorrow I'm going to become a great coach. How am I going to do it? Well, I'm just going to talk to people and tell them I can fix their problems. That doesn't make sense. Another piece is practice. Like, get some validation. At that time, I was 24. I'd barely done anything in the field of mental health. I just graduated at 23 with my degree, and then I took some time off. At 24, I was thinking, well, instead of going to work for somebody, what if I just start my own thing? That's why I did that. And to be fair, even though I was 18 to 23, I was already working in mental health. I was a mental health worker. I was a personal trainer. I had all these great experiences, right? I was in college for it. but I didn't have crap to my name. Like at 18, I was co-facilitating groups with doctors, right? So what that would mean was I was to some degree providing a level of therapeutic interventions in groups at 18 years old. Okay, so I started really young. However, that's not my one-to-one experience. That's not me getting proven, tested, provided results for individuals in interpersonal deep change. That's me being a supportive player. That's me doing the therapeutic work, but that's not showing the clear-cut results you really need to prove your process. So a lot of people want to jump the gun before they have results, and a lot of people want to jump in and start charging high-ticket coaching prices before they even offer like a $30 session to someone and make sure that they could help them and figure out what they're good at and what they're not good at. A big part of my beginning journey was working for like 20 to $30 an hour as a therapist. And then even when I quit being a therapist, to really pursue coaching and do that at least part time while I was still a firefighter, I was still charging $30 to $50 an hour. A lot of people don't want to start there. A lot of people are like, well, coaches are out there making 100 to 300 an hour. I'm going to start there. Why? What have you done? What have you done that gives you the audacity to say you're worth your information and your process is worth 300 an hour, right? Because it has nothing to do with you. Like even for me, I charge what I charge, not based on I think I have that value, but I think my 13 years of experience, hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment from proven process is worth what I charge. That's why I charge what I charge, not because I have the ego to think that's what I'm worth. And people who can't get that shift in their mindset through their head is why people stay stuck, because they're like, well, coaches are charging 300, so I should charge 300. It's like, what have you invested? What have you learned? Why is the information you have worth $300? And one thing that I had a mentor tell me that I think is probably one of the biggest eye openers is when you're going to charge a price for something, you need to be able to justify that price with a multiple of an ROI. So if you can't promise a good multiple of an ROI, even if it's not something tangible, right? Like, I'll make you feel better. Let's just say that's the ROI. Well, how much better is this person going to feel that it's even worth what you're asking them to pay?
Right.
Because if it's not life altering, you better not be charging high ticket prices. And so that's a massive point that I have to touch on. I mean, there's plenty more things that I could say, but I think those two really kind of drive it home is you need your process, you need your back end, and you need results. Like you need to start somewhere, you need to start cheap, you need to show that your stuff works. And for me, one last thing that I did, so I guess there'll be 3 points here, is I worked with everybody. I took on anyone literally who would pay me money for two reasons. One, because I needed cash because I was just starting, and anyone who's a business owner and says that that ain't the way to do business is full of it, because that's what you do as a brand new business owner. You just focus on cash flow. And then when you figure out and you get enough cash flow, you focus on who's getting the best results, and then you double down on that category. So I worked with teenagers, I worked with adults, I worked with people in 9 to 5s. I got my first entrepreneurial client. I worked with startups. I worked with um, investors like VCs who wanted me to work. Actually, that's how I got into startups. I was working with a VC, and one of the companies he invested in, he said, "Hey, this guy could use a little help. I'd like to introduce you." And boom, that guy became a client. That's how I started working in the startup world. But I was open to everyone. And eventually, the clients that I shouldn't have worked with faded away.
Mm-hmm.
And the clients that I should have worked with referred me. And then I started getting more traction in that category. And so it wound up being that I wasn't for the average 9 to 5 person. And if you've listened to the other podcast, you know that I believe there's nothing wrong with that person. I absolutely have tons of love for those people. It's just, it seemed to be that one, I was having more fun, and two, I was getting better results with the high performer or the entrepreneur, somebody who is in a executive position. And that's not only who I got the great results with, like I said, that's who I had a lot of fun with. And when you bring fun and you have energy to work with that person, the results get even better. And so it just became this continuous wheel of improvement. And then I was having so much fun, so I continued to get curious. How do I help this person more? What are the things I need to learn to actually really create more impact and more change with this person? Because funny enough, I got fired by my first executive coaching client. She literally told me to my face, when I came in for a session one day, she's like, I forgot we have a session today. I don't even know why you're here because you can't help me. And she eventually, after we finished out, like I think she had 2 or 3 sessions left. She was just like, "Yeah, we're not continuing." I was like, "I kind of figured that," and it sucked because she was 1/3 of my income at that point. I was reeling. I was like, "Oh crap!" But I had fun before that, and I said, "All right, I could quit trying to work with entrepreneurs, or I could figure out why I couldn't help her." And so I did more research. I learned a lot more. And then I started working with exclusively like entrepreneurs for a period, and it was phenomenal. So I know I went on a little bit there, but I think these are really important points for people that want to get into this industry is like you can't just get into this industry. There's a process to it.
So I think your message applies to a lot more than just coaching.
Sure.
You know, in business in general, kind of doing that shotgun approach is what they call it, especially
Mm,
when you're starting out, to see what you're successful in and then double down
right.
is exactly what you need to do. It's the shotgun approach, and then you become niche specific, and then you double down with what's working. And then guess what? It's just fine tunement from there. So that's specifically what I've done for virtual assistants as well. I loved your mindset for not spending your life savings because a lot of people would disagree with that sentiment. Like
Oh yeah.
Jordan Belfort, you behind on your credit card bills? Good. Pick up the phone and start dialing, right? It's if you're in a corner, spend all the money you have because at
Mm,
that point you have everything to lose. So at this point you're going to be better. You have to, right? I think that's the wrong mentality, especially if you're trying to become a coach and help people and you're showing desperation. That shouldn't be it. You
yeah.
should figure it out, learn how to become a better coach, and make the healthy, smart decisions and not just be impulsive. So I thought that was great advice.
Well, I'm a big fan of that logic because I've also gone into some crazy serious debt at least twice in my life. And being $40,000 in debt at one point, like, was not a good feeling. It just wasn't. And it was scary because you don't know if you could pay it back. I wound up having to work like 4 jobs to start paying that down. And when I tell you I was working from 8 a.m. until 9 p.m., I'm not lying. Like it was insane. I started doing applied behavioral analysis, ABA, where I would go and work with autistic kids in the morning and I would help them learn basic skills. And then from there, I was a traveling home therapist, and I would go to like 2 to 3 people per day, or four, whatever it was. I would like go see them, and just boom, boom, boom. And then from there, I started working at a clinic, like a private practice, and I would go see therapy clients from like 4 in the afternoon until 8 or 9 at night. And I would do this every single day. And it's just like that was what I had. I had to do it, right? And I would finish at the therapy clinic. I would still try to make time for the gym, and I get done at 8 or 9, go to the gym at 10, get done by 11 when the gym closes, and then I come home and I'd like fall asleep and I'm just gassed.
Right.
And it just was what it was, and it sucked. And that was one time. And then there was another time I went to that, and I don't even want to discuss that crap. But it's something that's like, at least for me personally, I already did it twice. And I know that it sucks and it makes your life 10,000 times harder. And one of the biggest stressors that people are aware of but don't talk about enough is finances.
Hmm.
When I was doing marriage counseling and relationship counseling with clients, I could probably say 95% of the clients I worked with that had the biggest issues that were virtually impossible to overcome for them was based on finances. It was based on that they were in debt, the wife keep spending stupid crap, or the husband kept buying things he shouldn't have, or just whatever it was. But it would come back to finances so friggin' often that it became like this impasse because neither of them wanted to get on a budget, or whatever the case is. So I know the strain that finances puts on people. I know the strain at least put on me. And so, yeah, I'm going to advocate against that. I think, to Jordan Belfort's point, it takes a very specific person to be like that.
100%.
If you work that way, do it. But I'm not a fan of believing that money is mystical. Like, I hate when people say You can just manifest money. Like money's just energy. Yes, to some degree it is, right? Because there's a component of energy that goes into earning that money, right? Like you spend X hours to earn X dollars, that's your energy. But the reality is that money is very intentional and intelligent. And if you treat money like it's mystical, it just means you don't understand money. And if you do that, what do they say? Someone who doesn't understand money will soon be parted of it. So understand money, understand the power of it. Like build a good, healthy relationship with it. Don't go into debt. Don't make stupid decisions because you think money will pop out of nowhere if you invest. Sometimes it works, but that also comes to your level of dedication, your level of comfort, your level of risk tolerance. Maybe you go in debt and you are freaking out. Maybe you go in debt and you're super calm, collective, and comfortable because you are extremely confident that you could earn that back. But those are still two different mindsets. If you're calm, collective, and comfortable in debt because you know you can make it back, you're going to come with a different energy. You might be successful. You're going to be freaking out the whole time, staring at your bank account, looking at the negative sign, and desperate and scared. You're not going to make it back. You're going to be screwed. So avoid that situation. Know who you are.
And I think there's a couple things to be said on it. One, I want to give a shout out to Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad and Cash Flow Quadrant, the book and the game. I own both. I've read the book multiple times. I highly recommend it. If you guys want to learn more about money and how have money work for you instead of you working for money, which is a one of his famous quotes in there. I highly recommend getting the cash flow quadrant and reading the book and playing the game. And it's just a board game, but it's a fun way of transitioning your mindset into how money works for you instead of you working for money.
Hmm.
Then the second thing is you talk to a lot of people who think that when they get to a certain level, their life is going to change. And it really doesn't. I can speak that from experience. Like if you're currently making 60,000 a year and you're thinking that if I reach this mythical, magical $100,000, it's going to change things dramatically. It really doesn't. And I that old rap line, more money, more problems, that's what it becomes. And if you don't know anything about money, guess what? You're going to get that bigger house. You're going to get that bigger car. You're going to get that fancier things that you just can't afford. Guess what comes back with that? Higher bills, higher costs. And now you're back to where you started, living paycheck to paycheck, but you have a nice shiny ornament on the front.
Doorstep.
Yes, whatever it is on the sidewalk there. But that doesn't change your problems. What changes your problems is transitioning your mindset, and I think that's where you're going with it.
Oh yeah. I mean, and to that point, and I'll finish off with this before we transition to the next thing. I worked with clients who are wildly successful. Like some of them have almost a personal income, not a business, almost a personal income of $1 million, and still like I have no money. I'm like, dude, you make $1 million. How do you have no money? Like that's your personal. That's not even your business income. That's what you have coming in for you. How do you have almost no money? Well, I got three houses, I get the two cars, and it's like, why do you have three houses and two cars? Well, why do you have this? And why do you constantly go out to these nice dinners? And why do you constantly buy the most expensive jewelry? And why do you like I saw one dude he made this celebration for it was like his kid's birthday or something. It looked like a wedding. I was like, what are you doing, man? What? So you're right. It's not about how much you make, right? Because conversely, if there was somebody who was only making $70,000 and they only spent 30, and I had that client who's making 1 million and spends 980, the person who's making 70 and spending 30 is actually wealthier because they're retaining more. Wealth isn't about how much you make, it's about how much you retain.
Right, 100%. So I think that I wanted to talk more about your message, and for those who haven't
Sure.
listened to the previous podcast, I do highly recommend it. But Vin's got a fantastic story, and I think now is the time where we can kind of go into detail on your story because at that moment in the podcast, I just got little snippets. So Vin, why coaching? Why'd you get into it in the first place?
Well, the transition into coaching was interesting because I mean, it's a good question, but the other question could be like, well, why did I become a therapist? And I became a therapist because I was following in my dad's footsteps. I always wanted to be a therapist because my dad's a therapist, and I thought my dad is like the smartest guy ever and the coolest guy ever, right? Because that's what every son does. They think their dad's awesome. And I'm not saying that I thought all that because that ever changed. It never did. The thing is as I was doing therapy with people and I had worked in every setting, so the aspect of my career or my culmination of experiences was 10 years as a therapist and working in therapeutic settings, working everywhere you could think of. So if somebody wants to name a setting, I could probably say I've worked there. And with that being said, I started feeling like therapy isn't as helpful as I believe it could be. And I don't know what's missing, and I don't know why. And I'm sure it's some info I don't have, right? And so I started seeking out how can I help people more? Because when you look at the stats in society, more people are in therapy nowadays, more people are on medication nowadays, and more people are continuously anxious, depressed, and getting worse. The stats don't make much sense to me. I had somebody I was telling this to somebody who's actually a therapist the other day, and he's like, "Well, I think you're making a gross overgeneralization because those are systematic issues." And I'm like, or sorry, systemic issues. I was like, I don't think that all of the people that are in therapy and on medication are oppressed minorities. I've come to learn that it's pretty much the everyday American because I don't think almost 70% of America in therapy and on medication and almost 70% of America not happy is the minority, right? So what do we got going on here? And I started really questioning what I was feeling. Why is it that I'm dedicating my life to something and I don't feel like it helps? In fact, feeling that way, how can I continue to dedicate my life to that? And so I was thinking, well, I don't know what the better way is, but I want to find it. And one day, my girlfriend was, I forgot what it was. I think it was an event, like some sort of free event or something. And this big, ginormous man with a raspy voice was on that screen. And I was like, who the hell is that? She's like, oh, that's Tony Robbins. I'm like, who's Tony Robbins? And she's like, it's him. I was like, okay, well, what does he do? She's like, oh, he's a life coach. I'm like, life coaching is bullshit. I'm a therapist. I have a degree. I went to school. I'm real. Life coaches aren't. That's kind of what most therapists think, by the way. Or maybe it's transitioned now, but this was years ago, mind you. And so she said, no, 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 he's really, really good. You should just listen to him. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think a life coach is going to teach me anything. Life coaches, they have their degree. It's printed on the back of a Chinese takeout menu. I was like, they're not real. They're not somebody I should listen to, especially with my background. So right, the arrogance of me comes out. And we lived in a one bedroom apartment at the time. So realistically, I wasn't going to escape anywhere. I just kind of went to the other side of the living room and sort of tuned it out, played some video games on my phone, but I was hearing him in the background, and a lot of the stuff he was saying was making sense to me, but not because of the fact that he was saying coaching stuff. The biggest kicker is it was making sense to me because I recognized the fathers of psychology in what he was saying. However, it's branded and labeled a very different way, so it could apply to everyone. The thing that fascinated me most to Tony Robbins was that he distilled down information that is written textbook upon textbook in technicals and practicals, right? And all these things that I had studied to learn as a therapist, but he's distilled it down in a way that everyone can make sense of it. So that really piqued my interest because I'm hearing him, he's talking, he's like, I've come up with the six human needs theory. And I'm like, Maslow came up with the human needs hierarchy, right? Maslow is one of the fathers of psychology. And then he's talking about, he's like, you have to understand that there's no such thing as good or bad thing. Every behavior is meant to meet a need. And I'm like, huh. Now he's talking about Skinner, who's the father of behavioral theory. And I hear all of these amazing things. And then he's saying, you have to look at people as a whole. And I'm like, ah, oh, that's Ericksonian. And so I was getting so freaking wrapped up in all of this because it just hit the clinical side of my mind. But I'm like, who is this life coach that is a very practical psychologist? And so I started getting into the Tony Robbins Kool-Aid, and I became a massive fan. And in doing so, I virtually immediately enrolled in his coaching certification program. It's the Robbins Madonnas training, which, by the way, funny enough, Chloe Madonnas is a renowned psychologist. She's like very well known. She's one of the best in the world at the time. And so he put together a training. It's called the RMT, Robbins Madonish training. And I started like consuming that. Like I was addicted, man. This training is over 100 hours. I was probably watching 10 to 15 per day if I had the time. I would just one video after another. I was taking notes. I was watching. I was pausing it to take even more notes. And I would rewind it so I could hear it again. And then I'd go back into it. And I was just loving it. And I was like, man, this is the sauce I've been missing. And then Tony also has this proven track record where he would take people who have been in therapy for 10, 15, 20 years on medication with no solution or resolution to their problems. And he would take them in 15 to 20 minutes and get rid of their issues. Like, and it's not fake. It's real. Like there was this one time a psychiatrist brought in his client who had an extreme fear of snakes that they could not get over. It was like 15 years almost. He brought her in. He did something with her on stage in front of a few hundred people, and then he brought out a snake, and she was playing with the snake afterwards. She was playing with the snake for 20 years in therapy. She couldn't resolve it. After 20 minutes, she's playing with the damn snake.
Is it hypnotism? Is this
No,
a lot like Shallow Hal?
no. Well, Tony Robbins is a shout out.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. No, so it's something that a lot of therapists look at as what's the word, like Fox Fox therapy or whatever the case is, like not something that's really effective, right? It's like, oh, the results are inconclusive to some degree, blah blah blah. He's a master of neurolinguistic programming, and he has a very deep understanding of human psychology and behavior through his deep study of psychology and all these founding fathers of psychology and all the amazing processes and systems in psychotherapeutic methodology. And so I really got enamored by that. And I said, you know what? This is the way. But I realized as he was teaching all of these things he's teaching, he's not really talking about it because he can't. But a lot of the stuff that was in there was also related to doing like psychotherapy. However, he doesn't go super deep into it because you don't want to train people who aren't therapists to do therapy, right? So a lot of his stuff stayed on the coaching side in this training, which was the stuff I didn't understand or know. And so as I got wrapped into that, I also said, oh, here's the really cool thing. Because I'm a therapist, I could actually include the stuff that I know he's saying and doing that he's not including in these trainings. So I can effectively, and a lot of people don't know this, by the way, Tony Robbins is not a psychotherapist. He's never been licensed and he didn't go to school for it. He just had such a deep desire to learn this stuff that he read like 700 books in the personal development industry and learned basically everything about psychology, neurology, physiology, all this crazy stuff. And so I said, I can, however, because I am a licensed therapist, I can, however, create a new standard for mental health. I can create one of the first hybrids of therapy and coaching in one service because I have the credential, I have the background, and I know what I'm doing. And I can legally say I am doing some aspect of therapy. It's not full therapy, it's a hybrid, and I bridge the gap between both worlds. So I can actually offer people a very holistic and comprehensive way of how they will get life transforming results through my methodology that I basically call it a TMC. It's therapy, mentoring, and coaching in one. And so that's what got me into coaching. And that's what got me to essentially leave behind being a therapist to some degree. I'm still actually very proud of being a therapist. I think for a while I didn't want to identify with it because therapy has a lot of negative connotations, and because of my beliefs that it wasn't really helping people, I didn't want to be called a therapist. But the interesting thing is that people actually were taking me more seriously as a coach because I have a therapist credential. I have had people tell me they don't talk to coaches, but because they saw my credential, like let's just say LinkedIn, for instance, I do messaging on LinkedIn. Because they saw a credential next to my name, they were willing to hear what I had to say.
Hmm.
So there is some weight to having the credential, and it has helped me open doors. That is a fact. However, I had to reconcile with myself that I didn't want to be called a therapist because I couldn't see therapy as working. And so my new mission became I want to show the world that there is a better way to do mental health. And I do believe it is a hybrid of therapy, mentoring, and coaching. And if you are not doing that, you're probably not helping your clients to the best of your abilities.
Well, you guys heard it here first. At least I did. Vincent Infante, the new Tony Robbins. I, but seriously, I love that message. And the fact that you were so transformed by one of the most powerful men on the planet is, and to be honest, you're not the only one. He changes and, transitions people's mindsets and how he views things to millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
Tony Robbins is an amazing person. It's been a while since I only did a virtual seminar, but it's been a while since I've done one of them. And to be honest, I feel like I'm going to go back there. Tony Robbins wrote a very big book that I am ashamed to say that I haven't finished, but it's called Money. And there's a audio book on it as well, but I think it's like 16 hours. It's a pretty good one right there. You're gonna show it right there. I got the
I
hard
believe
book
I have
cover.
it. Hold on, I think I have it. I
It's
think I
a
have.
it's a Moby Dick one. It's a huge book.
You know, I have a lot of his other stuff, but I don't see. I know which one you're talking about, right? It's Money Master the Game.
I
I
it's
think
it's
that's the
gold.
one.
It's in gold lettering. I think it's just called Money. Like I said, it's been
Mhm.
a while. I wasn't able to finish the actual book, but what I'm getting at is the principles of the actual book and how he talks about money and how he talks about retaining it and attaining it and your mindset shifts. I actually apply a lot of that knowledge, in my previous podcast episodes here about being success driven and financially driven and
Mm.
transitioning your mindset and how to treat yourself mentally and how to treat your business. And I apply a lot of Tony Robbins teachings just like you did to today's life. And I encourage everybody to also visit him and Vince because Vincent Infante over here is going to be the new Tony Robbins, and I personally believe it, man. I know we were kind of laughing beforehand as something, but I think that's a huge goal. And if you're taking his teachings and making it better, that's the American way, you know. And
Mm.
I'm just glad that I get to be here with it.
You know what's funny, man? And I had that like thought in my mind, right? Because one of the things that I've learned in psychology, so this is a technique from cognitive behavioral therapy, is called modeling, and it's very practical. It's basically look at someone if you're focused on a person, right? Or something if you're focused on a product or whatever. Look at whoever or whatever is getting the results you want to achieve and figure out what they did and start doing it and just make it your own, but start doing it too. And
Right.
so when I looked at what Tony Robbins is doing, I was like, I want to become like that. That I want to be at that level. I want to be like the next Tony Robbins, like you said, right? And there was a moment where I had some doubts. Transitioning entrepreneurship is very hard, and nobody ever tells you that. And so, because I had never been an entrepreneur, becoming one was really hard path I had to figure out myself. And I didn't know any entrepreneurs either. Like my dad has his own private practice, but he also worked two full-time jobs, or sorry, one full-time job and one part-time job while he had his private practice, which was essentially a side business. So my dad wasn't a full-blown entrepreneur. He worked a 9 to 5. He had a second job on the weekends and his private practice at night. My dad was a hardworking man, but he wasn't like entrepreneur, right? So I never had any measure for that. I grew up in a somewhat middle class family where all of my friends were from 9 to 5s. All their families had 9 to 5s. Everybody was trained to get city jobs. Like, you want to be a part of the union, you want the benefits and the pensions and this and that. At least that's really big where I'm from in New York. And so entrepreneurship wasn't a thing. And I had to figure out all of these hardships literally on my own. I had to make entrepreneurial friends on my own. I had to figure all this crap out. And there was a moment in time where it was really, I mean, there was multiple moments in time where it was hard. There was multiple moments where I had no money. Like, at the time my girlfriend was still working. She wound up paying my credit card bills one month because I literally had $10 in my bank account after paying my other bills. And money wasn't coming in. I was struggling to get clients, all this stuff. And it was funny because I was out one night. I just finished MMA training and my MMA instructor was like, "Hey, I'm gonna meet this guy. He's like, you should come out and meet him." Because I was telling him, I was like, "Man, I want to really step into this coaching thing. I just don't know how to do it. Like, it's tough for me." So this guy is like a master of branding. So his name is Mike Kim. He's one of my good friends, or at least I consider him to be. And that night I didn't know who he was. But Mike is an interesting guy because he's very honest, he's very nonchalant, and he's very reserved, right? And he, him and I were sitting there at dinner, and my trainer Jay, he's like, dude, he's like, tell him what you were saying to me. I was like, hey Mike, I want to really develop this coaching thing. I just don't know what to do. Probably like a branding issue or something, right? I was like, I don't know. And he's like, well, what's your background? Like, why do you want to do it? Similar to what we just talked about here. And I started giving him my background, like what I do and how I help people and why I help people and what my mission is and all that stuff. And Mike just sat there super quiet and he's just eating, just sitting there eating, not even really looking at me because I'm sitting next to him. He's just eating, super nonchalant. And so afterwards, I kind of just let it all out, and I was like, Mike, do you think I could become like the next Tony Robbins? And he's like, still doesn't look at me, by the way. He's just still casually eating. He's just like, yeah, I do. It's just, I don't know why, but that that actually like settled my life. I really still to this day cannot tell anyone as to why that moment sticks out so much, as to why Mike nonchalantly just telling me, yeah. It was almost as if it just gave me permission to dream big.
Hmm.
And he was somebody that I think this was it. He's somebody who I didn't even know that believed in me. And he wasn't saying it to get my money because he didn't even offer to work with me. And some people might say, well, that was the tactic. But Mike, as I've come to understand, is an extremely genuine guy. He would only say yes if he actually believed it. Because now I've built a friendship with him, I know that to be true. And I guess that's, even though I didn't know that about him at the time, that's what I felt. And that then transitioned to a few really powerful moments. Like I was at a business seminar hosted, Tony Robbins Business Mastery. And out of 30,000 people, he picked me and gave me a personal one-to-one business intervention. A little while after that, I wanted to start learning how to be a better speaker. And I took a speaking course through Les Brown called the Power Voice System. And I was picked out of 600 people to be one of 20 people on a live virtual summit that he's going to host. And in that, I got a one-to-one intervention from Les Brown. My childhood, like, well, not my childhood, right? Because we didn't have the internet in my childhood, but like my inspiration for speaking. I used to listen to Les Brown on repeat when I was running or doing anything and I needed some inspiration. His voice was my favorite one. And then he listened to my story and he said, one, he said, do you have a book? Because if you don't, you need to write it. He said, number two, here's how you can make your story better, but I love it. And I have both of these on video for anybody who wants to verify this crap. Because I was with my girlfriend at both times, and when Tony picked me in his master, I was like, baby, get the camera. And then Les Brown was like, Vin, we're gonna do you. Like, we're gonna talk your story. It's like, baby, get the camera. And so each time I had in my hardest days, and I think this is what everybody needs. In my hardest days, I had two people that I admired extremely deeply. For some reason, out of hundreds and thousands of people, pick me, and somebody I didn't even know believe in me. And I think we all need that to a very high degree. And these were some things that, when I was ready to quit, stopped me from doing so. I mean, I can't tell you what the universe had in store for me. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't believe that things just happen. I believe that that was the universe being like, hey, this guy's getting his ass kicked a little bit. Like, let's remind him he's on the right path. Because those times I had like no money. I was stressed. I was struggling. I mean, there were days I was just sitting there kind of crying and it sucked. But when you have moments like that, how could you not feel that you're doing the right thing? So
You know,
it regave me hope.
I think those moments they come once in a lifetime. And I do agree with you. I think that the best thing about you is that you understand that, and it's you live it. You wear your heart on your sleeve, and I can see that. But more importantly, what you take with that information drives your message. And I think that's why I wanted to do this podcast with you full time, is because the soul that you have and the person that you are is it all encompasses you, and you're just a very special and gifted and unique person that I've never met, and I know in my heart that you're going to be that person, you know, that next Tony Robbins, that next person who's going to be in a crowd of 30,000 people, and you're going to be doing the same exact thing and telling that same exact story and transitioning, changing lives. So,
Thanks, man.
of course, when these moments happen, you know, and you didn't take them for granted, and it wasn't just like, oh yeah, Tony just picked me and Les just picked me, right? It reshaped you, it reshaped your image and your brand. You know, for the people that do get these types of moments, how do they actually take it all in? How can they really, you know, consume it, and more importantly, understand that this is a once in a lifetime thing? How do I how do I become better? Because I think those are very huge and historical, and I don't think they happen all the time. So I think that's so magical. I'm just trying to really capture, you know, how you made that your internal compass and your message. Like, what advice would you give to people that, you know, see a huge opportunity, and how can they make the most out of it?
Got to be willing to receive it. And I'm not trying to put out some woo-woo information of like, yeah, manifest. But a big part of it is showing up, right? Like for let's just go with the business mastery example, right? I'm sitting there and Tony Robbins goes, who wants a business intervention, right? And you know what's interesting? Not everybody raised their hand. I mean, there was a lot of people that did, right? There was 30,000. It's like, oh my God, Tony Robbins, yeah. But not everybody raised their hand. And what was even funnier is when I was sitting there, like telling my story to Tony or telling him like what I was struggling with, and a lot of people in my group were private messaging me because, mind you, what made this even more magical is that it was over Zoom. And if you've done these virtual events with Tony, you know that he actually can't see every single Zoom screen. In fact, we really want to talk about the mysticism here and build it up for people a little bit more. Everybody that was raising their hand, he called someone. I think her name was Julie. And they pulled Julie up on screen. And so even though I had my hand up, I was like, he called Julie. I guess it is what it is. I guess I'm not getting an intervention, or maybe I'll try next time, or it's just not meant to be, or whatever. Julie was having some technical issues. She couldn't get her sound to work. Now, Tony, he's a master of doing events. And so anyone who knows that Tony could be a little impatient at events because everything's about timing, right? And not impatient in a bad way. He's just like, all right, if it ain't working, like move on next. So they gave her like a second. They were like, hey, can we get this going? And she was trying, and she was like frantic. She was like trying to move things right because who wouldn't want the intervention from Tony? And she's like hitting buttons, and you see like in her face, she's like, oh my God, I'm gonna miss it. And Tony goes, guys, get her sorted out. Take her off screen. We'll pick someone else, and then we'll go back to Julie. And then he goes, how about Vincent Infante? And I'm like, ooh, he picked me. I was like, oh my God, he picked me. And so that's even cooler because it wasn't even, it wasn't, I'm doing the air quotes for anybody who's listening to this on audio. It wasn't supposed to be me, but it was. That's why it became me, right? And so I think the interesting thing is when people saw that I was up there, right? And then I was telling him all this stuff, and people were just texting me, like texting, private messaging me in Zoom. You're like, you're so brave. You're sharing your story. Oh my God, like, I can't believe you're telling everyone, blah, blah, blah. And I found that so interesting. I was like, why would you not want to tell people? Like, why would you not want to get the support, especially from Tony Robbins? Like, are you kidding me? If I'm at a Tony Robbins event and I'm paying all that money to be there, I want him to call on me. What do you mean I'm brave? Why am I brave? I'm trying to get my money's worth. And I think it comes back to the fact that a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to raise their hand. They don't want to share. They don't want to be in that level of authenticity.
Hmm.
You know what's interesting? A lot of people don't know this about me, which is fine. I don't really care about it anymore. I used to write poetry. I actually started out my current Instagram page, the one that's my coaching page. I transitioned that page like 3 to 4 times. I started off with doing like, what did I start with? I started with poetry, and I would write something, all these different things that I would think up, and I would just sit there and I would kind of get creative with it. And then I started to anonymous motivational quotes, and then it became what it is today. But there was one thing that I wrote that sticks out to me sometimes, and it says, the dark is able to hide things, and the light is able to reveal things. And I think that's why children like to play in the dark and adults like to avoid the light. And I think that, at least in this conversation, that quote is really true for me, because a lot of people don't want to be seen in some capacity. Like, I'm sitting here, for instance, as at that moment as like a life coach who's saying I can't get coaching clients. And not only can I not get coaching clients, at the time I was charging 120 an hour. I was like, I can't get people for 120 an hour. I'm about to tell the guy that charges $1 million a year and built a multi-$100 million coaching brand, I can't get clients for $120. How dumb do I look? And so there's this fear that people have of putting themselves out there, even with getting Les Brown to pick on me. When I got the email that said, "Congratulations, great one, you're going to be one of the speakers on uh, Les Brown's Power Voice Summit." Because I went to this Tony event beforehand, something that Tony said stuck out to me, or a lot of things, but this one in particular. He said, "You cannot get anything you do not ask for in this life. If you want something, the best way to get it is to ask for it." And so when I saw that Les Brown was picking on people randomly in his calls, I said, how can I get in front of Les Brown? Or what's the best way? Well, Tony seems to think the best way is asking. So Les Brown had a coach named John Tallarico. And John Tallarico is one of Bob Proctor's top coaches. So he was working with Les Brown, and they were co-facilitating this Power Voice group. And I messaged John and I said, "John, I'm going to be on, as one of Les Brown's speakers. I would love to make sure that my speech is completely powerful. I would love to know how I can give the best speech I ever can." Mind you, that was going to be my first ever speech after I decided I wanted to become a speaker. And John said, "Well, as you know, Mr. Brown is very busy. He only comes on for an hour of our 2-hour course. I will see what I can do." I said, "Thank you, John. I appreciate that." And I started just showing up. And like he said, Mr. Brown would only be on for an hour. So 7 to 8, he would be there. It's about 7:45. He already picked on all these different people. And as I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm not getting called on. And then at 7:50, he goes, "Oh, we have one more person. How about Vincent Infante?" And I'm like, son of a boom. And so that is the power of being willing to put yourself out there. That's how you can receive these things. It doesn't always work.
Right. But you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. There's all those inspirational quotes from Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan and Tony Robbins. And, I think being afraid of success is a real thing.
Oh
People
yeah.
are afraid of success and asking because they don't know why, or they're afraid of rejection. Maybe that's really encompassing.
Mm.
So, Vin, this was another fantastic episode. I love just sitting here and talking to you. And for those of you guys that don't know, we were chatting for about an hour beforehand before we even started this podcast, and that just seems how it normally goes too. So, one of the most personable, friendly guys you'll ever meet. I promise you that. Is there any final, tips and tricks, or any message that you'd like to say out there?
I always have a good quote on hand, and I think I've been repeating myself on virtually every podcast that asks me if I have like a final word. And it really does come down to this quote that I've come to find is very powerful, and it's by Aristotle. And he says that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. sometimes it's easy to do the things that can make you successful. It's also easy to not do the things that can make you successful. And when you think about who you want to become or what you want to do on this world, just think about, how do you want to show up, right? What is your excellence? And how can you do that every single day, even just for a little bit? You don't have to be on 24/7. You don't have to be hustle, 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 no fun, ruin your life. You can simply dedicate yourself to something with your purpose, your passion, your just cause. You could become a part of something, right? Even if you're not an entrepreneur. Maybe you don't have to be the voice that's going to impact a billion lives. Maybe you can line up with somebody who's going to be that voice. Find a way to just step into whatever you feel your purpose or your passion is. Do it every single day and become excellence, right? Develop the habits. Do the thing. I know it sounds hard sometimes, or it could be hard if you're not used to it, or if you're having low energy or life is kicking your ass a little bit. But I will promise you that on the other side of that challenge is the thing you've probably been searching for at least half of your life, which is fulfillment. So take the shot, do the thing, show the world your excellence.
And watch our previous podcast, because I believe it's episode 2 or 3 where Vin talks about the big boulder that's in the way and constantly chipping at it. And it's really the path, before you get to the success. So listen to that one. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. And then if, Vin always does better with the closing messages here. So
sounds good. So you're going to want to join us for the next podcast. You'll want to check out our socials. And should you need anything at all, you can reach out at us. Currently, we have, it's funny, right? Because when these podcasts are released, we're going to have different emails. But for now, and these will probably still be in use at the time anyway, so don't worry about it. But for now, you can reach out to us at shane@thevagroup.com. Right? That's the email for Shane. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at vincent@vincentinfante.life, or check out the website, or check out my social, right? vin.infante for more tips, tricks, hacks to live your best life. And make sure to tune in next time, because we don't know the topic yet, but we're going to have some good stuff, because that's what we do. We're the 1%ers. We're going to figure out that great 1% topic.
It's always good stuff.
Always good stuff. Tune in next time, everybody.
All right, guys.